we go. Time to mess this up for every other speaker that comes out. I know. Good evening, Nerd Nights! Before we start, can we get a huge round of applause for our organizers tonight? Wonderful folks. All right, as Solomon so succinctly said, my name's Phil Tice. I'm thrilled to be here tonight to talk to you about the art of monster making. I know I missed Halloween by a couple weeks, but thankfully spooky is a year-round state of mind. Since the dawn of movie making, horror has been one of Hollywood's most beloved genres. And for over a century, the art of monster making has been integral to bringing those terrifying tales to the screen. Tonight I'm going to take you on a ghoulish tour through the makeup morgues of history, from the early days of Universal monsters to the animatronic monstrosities of the 1980s and beyond, and introduce you into some of the mad geniuses that shaped your favorite frights along the way. Be warned! There will be some makeup imagery shown during this presentation that some viewers may consider frightening. If you get scared, do as the late, great Wes Craven once said for his movie, The Last House on the Left. Just repeat, it's only a movie, it's only a movie, it's only a movie. But first, a little background on myself, so you can be confident I'm not talking out of my ass any more than I actually am. I am a horror director, a writer, and author, and I've been working on movie sets for about 10 years. But my first gigs and my first introduction to the world of horror came as a makeup effects artist. I'm mostly self-taught, as a lot of monster makers are, and I received a little bit of training during my time at Emerson College. I built creature suits as well as worn them. And my most challenging gig saw me in the role of a makeup department head on a project that had me personally oversee more than 30 actors on a multi-day shoot. It's been an incredible journey that's taught me to see from both sides of the camera and made me insufferable if we ever watched The Thing together. But enough about my history. Let's wind those clocks back 100 years and begin the story with the ghoul who started it all, Mr. Lon Chaney. Look at that mug. Leonidas Lon Chaney was an American film actor who is known as the man of 1,000 faces. He was renowned not only for his incredible acting ability, but he was also widely considered the great-grandfather of monster effects as we know them today. Since Chaney's parents were both deaf, he became a skilled pantomime from a young age, which helped him get footing in the vaudeville scene, and once he moved to silent films, he found his expressive face helped him truly transform into the monstrous characters he played. Think of him as the Doug Jones of the 1920s. Now, he portrayed iconic Universal monsters like the Hunchback of Notre Dame and the Phantom of the Opera. But because there was no established special effects makeup role on sets, and there wouldn't be, really, for decades, during those early ages of Hollywood, Lon was often responsible for creating his own looks and finding ways to distort his features for each new monster. Now, Lon was armed with his homemade makeup kit, which consisted of more traditional appliances like grease paints and powders, and also less traditional tools like funerary wax, cornstarch, shoe polish, fishing line, and false teeth. Now, Lon was heavily inspired by theatrical stage makeup, which used simple grease paint to create optical illusions with over-exaggerated features. You sync the eye sockets, you deepen the cheeks, elongate the nostrils, change your proportions, much of which were techniques developed in theater, vaudeville, and carnival sideshows. Combining these time-tested techniques with his own monstrous experimentations, Chaney created the bones of makeup effects as we know them today. And I would like you guys to tell me how you find Lon's handiwork. When the Phantom of the Opera premiered, the newspapers of the day reported, women fainted, children bawled, and grown men stepped outside for fresh air after the famous unmasking scene. That's a direct quote. That is, before the advent of sound in films, that soundtrack was added much later. In some of these screenings, actually, a very side note, that has nothing to do with my presentation. Sometimes you actually have live organ players in the theater with you doing live orchestration. Also a fun fact, Lon was not the only universal monster in the family. His son, creatively named Lon Chaney Jr., would go on to play the Wolfman in 1941. That was in the age of Universal Monsters in sound by that point, and also 11 years after the death of his father. Now, we're going to turn our clocks forward a few decades. That's not to say there weren't great monsters in the 50s and 60s, but if you've ever seen the original Star Trek, you know there's a lot of face paint and rubber masks. That's kind of the whole bag. The best stuff from those decades, in my opinion, was probably stop motion done by artists like Ray Harryhausen, who you can see. But that is a talk for another night. Instead, let's leap forward into the 1970s. Many people's opinion, the beginning of the golden age of makeup effects that will span through the 70s and 80s and create such iconic monsters as Freddy Krueger, the Xenomorph, and Beetlejuice, to name just a few, before being ended by the titanic arrival of Jurassic Park. But we're going to examine a much more subtle look from this era, from the scariest movie of all time, 1973's The Exorcist, and meet the godfather of makeup himself, Mr. Dick Smith. Now, after abandoning his first career as a dentist, Dick Smith began working as a makeup artist in the 1940s at NBC. It was in the television realm that Dick was able to experiment with special effects to pioneer what is now known as prosthetic makeup. Here you can see Dick working on a piece right here. At the time, makeup masks were normally made from one singular large piece. But Smith changed the game by breaking that makeup into 3 or more foam latex pieces, typically the cheeks, the nose, the brow, etc. You can see some of them here. I believe this is from Amadeus, which, incredible. Because it was more broken up and it wasn't a Halloween mask, for lack of a better term, it allowed those actors to give a more full range of their facial emotions. They were able to emote, they were able to move, they were able to see better, actually. A lot of it was very, very effective. But despite initial criticism from many professionals, Smith's makeup techniques proved superior and are still used today as an industry standard, which we will see to be kind of a constant theme for Mr. Smith. But for all you late bloomers out there, it wasn't until he turned 50 that Dick Smith earned his reputation as a master. After working on Marlon Brando's transformation in 1972's The Godfather, which also earned Dick Smith his nickname, and for his work on The Exorcist the following year, where he transformed the apple-cheeked Linda Blair into a possessed demon child. Now, that is not the look from The Exorcist we're going to look at today. I have another class participation question. How old do you think the actor in this photo is? Raise of hands. No guesses wrong. Right down here in the front.
35.
35? Can I get another guess? I'm curious. 50. 50? Can I get one more? 23. 23. This man pictured here is actually 44-year-old Max von Sydow, who was transformed into the elderly Father Marin in a look that is still considered a landmark in old age makeup effects today. And this is what Sydow looked like when he was actually 70, 30 years later. Wow. I know, right? Isn't that cool? Now, do you see how incredible this transformation is? It's far subtler than those theatrical broad strokes we were seeing in the early days of makeup. What sets Dick Smith apart was that he studied human anatomy to better understand how it functioned and how it would change when you aged. You see, your mind subconsciously knows when something doesn't look organic. And that inauthenticity makes something stand out as fake to us, landing in the uncanny valley of our subconscious. It's easier to bend the rules when you're making an alien from your imagination, but when you're trying to replicate something everybody has seen, like an old man, the magic trick is a little bit harder to pull off. The more organic you can make that look, the easier it is to fool your audience into believing it. There's a reason that more than 50 years later, and nearly a decade after Dick Smith's death, this is still considered the greatest old age makeup ever put to film. Dick Smith is the man who turns makeup effects into a science, and a whole generation of makeup artists spring forth from under his tutelage. We're about to get to that. Let's talk about some gore royalty. Lastly, we're going to look at two contemporaries of the 1980s creature feature scene. Mr. Tom Savini on the bottom and Mr. Rick Baker on the top, who remain probably the two most recognizable names in modern makeup. First off, Tom Savini, known as the king of splatter amongst fans and students alike, is synonymous with home-taught makeup, pioneering thrifty effects while on low-budget sets like George Romero's Dawn of the Dead and the, let's admit it, better Friday the 13th movies. Savini created the original child Jason in the first Friday the 13th and famously returned to kill Jason off, if temporarily, in part 4, the final chapter. His stipulation was, I gave birth to him, so you have to let me come back and kill him. Which is pretty metal. I love that gif. Savini was who I learned from growing up through excerpts in his book Grand Illusions, which for any shoestring budget makeup artist might as well have been the Holy Bible. Savini's clever, cost-effective effects included reverse photography, utilizing weapons with pre-cut holes to simulate actual penetration, which is what you're seeing in that little animated picture there. And a personal favorite of mine, the nickel trick, which is when Savini would take a nickel, bury it under makeup wax, and tie it to a fishing line to create a seamless bullet hole when yanked off the performer's head from off screen. Savini has worked on over 60 films in his career, including horror greats like Creepshow, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and Maniac, just to name a few. He is still working to this day. He rocks. He's a great guy. And of course, I would have my makeup artist card revoked if I did not mention the first person to ever win an Oscar for makeup effects. Now, despite the work of folks like Lon Chaney and Dick Smith, this category did not exist at the Academy Awards until 1981. And the first person to win it was actually one of Smith's closest proteges, Mr. Rick Baker, for his work on An American Werewolf in London. Since then, Baker has won 6 more Academy Awards for his work on films like Men in Black, Ed Wood, and the 2010 Wolfman remake, which ties him all the way back to the Chaney bloodline. But for now, we're going to focus on American Werewolf in London.
Here we're going to break down the anatomy of the famous transformation scene in American Werewolf in London. Here we have actor David Naughton. It's worth saying that an actor's performance is half of any makeup performance. If you don't have a great actor like this really selling this transformation, selling the pain, then the effects won't sell. It's a two-handed game. And speaking of hands, What you're seeing here, and in a number of other places in this transformation, is something Rick Baker himself created called Changeo animatronics. These were animatronic limbs and heads that would be used to extend parts of David's body in camera rather than use stop motion effects. Then they'd transfer to more traditional latex appliances. Here you're seeing them used on the ankles, but latex on the hands now that they're motionless. You also see this hair growing. This was done with reverse photography, as Rick Baker actually started with long hairs, trimmed backwards, and reversed the footage. For shots when they need to mimic inhuman proportions, actor David Naughton is coming out of the false floor, and he's also hidden behind smart couch placement. And now we come to the most iconic part of the transformation, the Changeo animatronic snout and head, which was a fully animatronic and puppeteered head pushed through a latex outer shell to create David's final monstrous moments.
Beautiful. And that is our evening's history lesson. Special effects makeup continues to evolve into the modern day, finding ways to work along CGI and new techniques to create creatures and never before seen ghouls that Lon Chaney could only dream of. However, I must stress, I'm gonna get on my soapbox here a little bit, so, there must always be a practical element in the art of monster making. For artists, for actors, for audience's sake, there must always be a tangible element to our frights, or they become unbelievable. We must preserve this century-old legacy for the generations of artists and filmmakers to come so that they may be given a chance to build on the bones of what came before. Thank you so much. All right, we're going to take some questions.